everyone. Today we are joined by Miss Ira Mathur, an celebrated and recognized Indian origin journalist working for Guardian Trinidad. Before we begin, Miss Mathur, I would really like to know more about your journey. How did you end up in Trinidad?
Thank you so much for asking me, and it's great to be here and great to meet you. Well, very quickly, my dad was in the Indian Army, and he, of course, like all Indian Army brats, I moved all around India from Simla to Bangalore to Delhi to Chandigarh in my childhood. And but at the age of 40, my father had a heart attack, and he decided for a change of career. He was a colonel in the army. He realized he couldn't go he didn't want to stay on. So he applied for jobs all over the world. He found a job to build the Claude Noel Highway in a tiny little twin island of Trinidad and Tobago, specifically Tobago. So we came here, and then I spent a year here in Tobago, and then I went to boarding school in England. I then to university in Canada, where I did a liberal arts degree in philosophy, literature, and economics, and then my master's in journalism in London. And then I came back here, started out in radio. My first thing was a coup attempt, so that was very interesting. And then television, and of course, I've been in print for all these years. So briefly, that's it.
Right, a very interesting journey. Definitely, although there are the cons, there are pros of being an army colonel's family member. You get to travel the world and the country, of course, but definitely the cons outweigh. Right. To begin with, the first direct question I can come up with is, how does the international news media look at its counterpart in India?
Well, I think it's seen in a very, in a double kind of way, right? And on the one hand, I think there's a kind of envy there because, you guys are still doing quite well. Mm-hmm. And newspaper sales and media, the industry hasn't fallen as much as it has, say, in Trinidad, where just during lockdown, we've seen during COVID lockdown and layoffs there were layoffs of journalists at several major newspaper and television stations, and the revenues, we've seen ad revenues fall by 40 to 50% in Trinidad. I think in India that hasn't happened simply because of the sheer volume of people who read in India. In terms of how you think the international media sees India, I mean, it's hard for me to say how everybody sees India, but I think, as an Indian living abroad, I would say that, just like India is such a vast and complex country with a very, very wide spectrum of excellence to, terrible journalism, we have seen that. And in recent times, I think I have been very appalled as an Indian to see a lot of purple journalism, to see a lot of very shouty journalism, which really shocked me because I saw somebody like Arnab Goswami, who I really kind of respected, went to Oxford and all that. And suddenly he was in this shouting match, with the whole thing with the suicide of Sushant Singh Rajput, and then really pillorying a very young woman, Riya Chakrabarti, without any evidence, and literally shouting and calling for her, incarceration without any proof. And that, to me, I mean, having been in journalism for so long, having done television journalism, that's really kind of a no to me. I was really surprised at how many channels where news anchors could literally go on there without substantiating anything, kind of find a story and find everything to support that story without any evidence. So kind of taking over really what the courts should have done, and so I think there's enormous respect. I mean, if I looked at in what's happening in India, there's in March 2018, there were over 100,000 publications registered with the Register of Newspapers in India. It has the largest second newspaper market in the world. And daily newspapers reporting a combined circulation of over 240 million copies as of 2018. So, and you have over 1,600 satellite. It's just phenomenal, and 400 news channels, and over 100 million copies are sold each day. So we, at some level, a tiny island like ours can't really even compare with yours. So we're in awe, and as well as just like what India does. It remains elusive. It's terrible and wonderful all at once. That's all I can say.
Right, really well put. So, what, according to you, are some similarities and differences between the Indian and international media standards?
I think, again, it depends on what kind of media that you're speaking of. You know, in the international media, again, you have, if you take the UK, which is better known, you take a publication like, say, the Daily Mail. I think it's got the largest, it's got actually the largest viewership across the UK. And maybe, I mean, you know, around the world, if you look at UK media, people look to the Daily Mail. It's got fabulous photographs. It's very sensational. It's easy to read. Similar, but then you also have the Economist, you know, and you have that comes out of the US, and then you have the Financial Times, which is not as well read. So, but has a lot of gravitas. Similarly, I think that Indian publications would have that spectrum, right? But I'm actually, I mean, I was in India about 2 years ago, and I'm actually quite impressed at the level of writing. I'm really impressed with the fact that India can kind of, you know, hold its own so well without even having to look out to the rest of the world, in terms of you know, human resource, in terms of publications that we've just talked about. But I do think, once again, that fact that yes, you know, you do have Fox News, but people kind of, it's, you know, people in the liberal media in particular, and people who think of themselves as educated, do kind of decry it, and they think of it as very biased and partisan. But unfortunately, I think that that's kind of more the norm in India. It's rather than the exception. And that's just the perception. And I may be completely wrong. But I do think that under Prime Minister Modi, the Indian media has come under some pressure. And one of the worst things I think that could happen to anybody in the media is self-censorship, right? So, and I think that that is what Indian media is doing more and more. I mean, you must have heard that in 2018, the celebrated news anchor, Mr. Bajpai, composed an expose detailing the wreck that went around the Indian newsrooms, and he revealed that the administration had employed 200 people to provide directions to editors on how they must report on the Prime Minister's activities, and alleging that he was asked by executives at his own network not to mention Modi on his programs, and then his satellite signals were tampered with during broadcasts. I mean, leading to his resignations. And over 10 police complaints have been filed against journalists who investigated India's migrant crisis, which is kind of as enormous as the pandemic in any nation. And over 600 people have lost their lives because of the unexpected nature of the lockdown for reasons of mental pressure, starvation, suicide, and police brutality. And, you know, I think that there's also even, I mean, I love looking at Indian media because, you know, as somebody who was born there and goes back there and is very much in touch with India. But, you know, I don't see many important topics like issues facing the LGBTQ community, or the climate change crisis, or migrant workers who've lost everything because of the pandemic. But there's too much entertainment gossip. People want to know more about, you know, Kareena Kapoor, or you know, and I mean, I do find that, and the live coverage of, you know, celebrities leaving the airport. I thought that, especially I feel very strongly about this, because I think especially in a developing country, it's really vital that, you know, the media as the fourth estate, what we do is that we give a voice to the voiceless. And there are still, I mean, over 300 million very poor people in India, and the pandemic is really affecting them badly. So I am just quite, I'm taken aback, and I'm very disappointed in the way Indian media is kind of going in that direction. And to me, the biggest thing that happened during lockdown was that, even as I saw the numbers rise in India with the pandemic, right? I know that Sushant Singh Rajput, a very loved celebrity and actor, you know, committed suicide. But it was unbelievable, that media circus. I mean, every single day while people were dying, while floods were taking place, while, you know, there was so many atrocities happening, I mean, around India included, they just continued talking about this one man who committed suicide, and they tried to pillory his girlfriend, took one girl and, you know, just plastered her on the face of every single news channel every day just to make money. And I found that very Machiavellian, and actually, frankly, against every philosophical principle that I think we've been brought up as Indians, you know, of sacrifice and service.
Right. So, according to you, was money the only reason important issues were being sidelined and this entire spotlight was on the circus that it was, or were there other reasons at play?
Well, I think primarily it would have been money, because, you know, while, I mean, channels all over the world were struggling with advertising. Newspapers are struggling with advertising, and, you know, it's something sensational that everybody wants. Even I was glued onto the television, wanting to know what was happening, and then until I caught myself. So money was big, but I think also that it was a lot of it was a lack of checks and balances in the Indian media. There aren't enough. The Indian Media Association, or the equivalent of what we have in Trinidad, was not strong enough to come out and say, because we are very linked with our legal fraternity, right? So that if there's any if there's any kind of attempted interference, we actually get together with other civic society and it's put to a stop. But that didn't happen in India. It just went on unabated. And I think that it really did suit the politicians who didn't maybe want to talk about what was happening with the coronavirus, who didn't want to talk about the migrants, who didn't want to talk about all the people kind of, you know, take the Dharavi slum in Mumbai, you know, what was happening with them? How do they get social distancing? And just think about the millions of people in India who lost their jobs and livelihood while people were stuck inside. You know, to me, it was also appalling. You get like celebrity news, all these celebrities, you know, coming out and talking about their yoga or their exercise. And I think, you know, you guys can do this because you have what you still call ayahs and servants coming in. Who's going out to collect your vegetables? Who's going out to pay your bills? It's all the ayahs. They're being exposed to the virus and they're taking it home to their families. So I think that part of it is also that India is a very stratified society, in that the people who are on the top, and we've inherited that maybe from our colonizers, people who are on the top are very, very entitled to the point of being obscene. You know, you take somebody like Ambani, and I just, each time I come to Bombay, I find it appalling that he could live there. And, you know, and yes, he's done great work, but really, I mean, shocking, right? And I think that it was a collective lack of responsibility. It was a lack of the media association to get together with the law society to put a stop to this. And I think also the Modi factor is a big factor, whether there was a lockdown or not, whether there were extenuating factors or not. I think it really suited the politicians that nobody was talking about what was happening to the migrant workers who weren't able to go home. Nobody was talking about the rising coronavirus cases. Yeah, you know, let's just keep talking about Sushant Singh Rajput. Let's keep making money. And that was, to me, I mean, like I said, India ranges from the terrible to the absolute amazing. And to me, that is when India reached the bottom, you know.
Right, and I think I agree. Like the spectrum that India ranges in is too broad, so much so that the society and even the media right now is highly polarized, is what I believe. Why do
Yes.
such polarization exist, and what can the media itself do to reduce such polarization?
Well, I think polarization is happening worldwide, right? I mean, whether you think about what's happening in the UK with Brexit, or you think about what's happening with Trump, you know, or you think about now what's happening with India, and recently with what's happened in Kashmir. I mean, and the migrants and all the, you know, and the mosque and the ruling. So I think that, I mean, Arundhati Roy said, you know, what is India? What is India? Are we just like, you are very different to me. My mother is, her name is Anwar Zia Sultana Khan. she comes from, my father is Mahendranath Mathur, right? Very different. I mean, he comes from a very strict Hindu family, and he's very strict Hindu, and he expects us all to be Hindu. My mother comes from a very old Muslim aristocratic family, from the states of Bhopal and Savnur. But we are a mixture of both. My mother studied in Lahore. My father fought against Pakistan twice. He fought against India. I beg your pardon, against China. So I think that there's no such thing as a kind of like a generic Indian. Let's start with that. Now, in terms of the polarization, I think, yes, the Modi government has given, I think, the right to lots of people with very extreme and intolerant views, and not the views that with which we came into independence, not with Nehru's views of a secular society. I think it was maybe a kind of payback time. It's like, okay, the Mughals ruled us for 400 years. Then came the Congress. The Congress broke us up. Pakistan was ours. Bangladesh was ours. Look how everybody has broken us up. We are taking back India. So I got a sense when Modi came back and the men in the orange robes came back, that suddenly that India was changing. And I mean, I know that even in the history books in India, they virtually wrote out Mughal history. And yet we are so proud, we all go and pose in front of the Taj Mahal or the Qutub Minar, and we are very proud of our monuments. We're proud of our Red Fort. But guess what? The Red Fort was inhabited by the emperors, right, at one point. And now it's a symbol of Indian independence. And, the Prime Minister stands there and gives a big speech on Independence Day. So, but I think the reason India was allowed to maintain some kind of cohesiveness was because of an inherent belief in secularity. Of course, it can't work in a country of 1.1 billion. How can it? That's why we've had, almost every state is agitating. You go from Punjab to, well, of course, Kashmir is a case in point, which has also been such a mess. And part of our mess is because of our history, right? But Kashmir was never really solved. So what I'm seeing now is a lot of strong man approaches. India is ours again. And I think that it is, when people start to say that I am Hindu, you are Muslim, and you start to dehumanize other segments of the society, what you do is actually you make yourself into a very small human being, and you only define yourself by one set of religions and rituals, right? So you don't define yourself by the deep philosophy that Indians have defined themselves for 2,000 years. You don't define yourself by the Sufis and the Buddha. You don't define. If you look at the Gita in Indian philosophy, it's the opposite of really what I think Modi, I think some of them are thugs, are doing. It's like a mindless. What it's done is that it's triggered the mindless masses, the masses who don't want to think for themselves, the masses who have dehumanized other people. And that is why, I mean, as half Hindu, half Muslim, living abroad, I consider myself both. My grandmother lived in Pakistan. She was a great pianist. She wrote music for Pakistani soldiers. My father fought for, I mean, who am I? In India, who am I? You're going to have to literally kill me and rip me in half and say I'm this or that, right? So I think it's really time we start to humanize one another. When when a Hindu and a Muslim meet in London, right? And you hear that it's happened to me, it's happened to my father who went to Aligarh University. And he is like he used to be part of the, RSS or whatever when he was younger. But when he met this Urdu speaker in London on the street, they saw the same in one another, the same language, the same food, the same background, the same recollection of the landscape, the beautiful trees, the music, the poetry, and the exchange of it, right? I mean, take something as simple as Mehndi, right? You go to a Mehndi, where you go to a Muslim wedding where there's Mehndi. Mehndi was not part of Islamic tradition. We got it from the Hindus. And similarly, a lot of you go to a gathering where there's ghazals, and you take Jagjit and Chitra Singh from, earlier time. Ghazals, where did they come from? We got the poetry from them. So we have to accept one another we have to start humanizing one another. And when we humanize one another, when we all bring one another up, I think India will be much stronger. Because under Modi, unfortunately, the kind of pressure he's putting it into, the very thing he doesn't want to happen will happen. It will crack in lots of bits. Unless you have an inclusive policy that brings all of India together, it is going to crack.
Right. And what role can the media play in bringing or humanizing people around?
Well, the media has been playing to the gallery, right? So that, Arnab Goswami knew when he was speaking to all those people that they would be also doing that. So it's right now the media has to come together, and the media, as the fourth estate, we have to take ourselves very seriously. We are part of holding the powerful to account. We're part of democracy itself. And we have to start taking ourselves very seriously. And we have to start asking the serious questions as to what our responsibility is. And the governing media body has to step in. The law has to step in. And we have to understand that, the power comes with responsibility. Similarly, we have to agitate for change within the technology. India leads technology, right? And you and I know that if you look at certain things on Facebook, maybe you love techie things, I love literature. I get taken down the algorithm of lots of literature, which I love. Who's winning, who's on the short list of the Booker Prize, all of that, which Indians are really coming up in writing these days. But it does another harm to me, because it doesn't show me enough about technology. It doesn't show me about science. It doesn't show me about what's happening to the poverty levels in India. What is the social structure of India? Because at the end of the day, the media's role, as I am concerned, we have to give voice to the voiceless. And when we stop doing that, and when we play to the gallery, and when we take a perfectly nice woman like Kareena Kapoor and put her on top. But, I wouldn't say she's the smartest woman in the world. She's all right. But, why do Indians do that? Why do we create so many gods and goddesses of people who are already so privileged? We have to, it has to come from us, and we have to agitate for the correct algorithms that introduce us to different forms of media, and we have to hold ourselves accountable. And a governing body, like where was that governing body? I'm asking you, when Arnab Goswami was spending all that 12, 14, 15, and not just him, lots of other people, airtime, spending it all on pillorying one girl. I mean, are you telling me, you're a young guy, I'm sure you've been introduced to marijuana. I've had marijuana at university. So what's going to happen? They're going to jail me for that? They're going to spend... It's such a shocking waste of time. Where was the media governing body holding them to account? That needs to be strengthened.
Right. And you talked about algorithms and how we need to have accountable algorithms. Well, algorithms are also responsible, I believe, in some form too, which help us spread fake news, and which has become a massive issue in today's time, not just in India but worldwide. How is one organization, or you specifically, trying to solve this issue
of fake news? Okay,
Yeah.
so it's been always around, right? Especially in a
Yeah.
tiny island like us. I mean, if you look at Trinidad and Tobago, rumor mongering has always been there. And the difference is, I now look at the news, but I've already had it on my WhatsApp, but a different version of it. So I now have to go and check it. Now, people have always liked sensational stories. That's why tabloids have sold, right? More than broadsheets. That's why Pink Villa does so well. So we understand that there's a huge market for it. Now, does it take over journalism, so that if the journalism is this big, if the media is this big, does it expand all of media so that you no longer have actual journalism I mean, journalists are supposed to be a mirror to the society. So if all the mirror shows is fake news and, celebrities going in and out of airports, you think that that's the sum of it. So what we actually need to do is we need to take it back. So if you look at a country like, say, Taiwan, right? The government in Taiwan, you can't fight fake news. You can't go under every Facebook comment and response. So you have to reply with exactly the same sensationalism or humor and make it as shareable as the fake news. You create a counter fake news website specific to the news circulating around you, right? So there's that there's Snopes.com, right? They kind of like a fact checker. So take the fake news minister of digital for Taiwan, brilliant woman, I think, Audrey Tang. What they actually did was that anytime there's some trending fake news, people report it like spam, right? With a mechanism, so that the rumors are met with fact checkers, and they drown the fake news with hashtags. And in Taiwan, people kind of like dogs. I don't know why, but they fight it with dog memes, right? So when people ask about, say, for social distancing, oh, it's fake news. What does that mean? They say 6 feet. How far is that? So what they do is that they say, okay, if you're talking about social distancing, take your dog and multiply your dog 6 times. Take 6 dogs, you're 6 dogs away. So I think that what needs to happen, first of all, we need to counter it with a very strong, and India is amazing with technology. Can India not have a similar thing to Snopes.com? But in India now, I suspect that more than fake news, what India suffers with is that the government pushes, and the government is very powerful, they push partisan news. So I don't expect the government to pay for an anti-fake, a fake news organization that kind of counteracts fake news. I think that the media association needs to take up that slack. I think that the Indians are really tech savvy. You guys need to come up with an app that does a similar thing to Taiwan, so that anybody reading, whether in India or the diaspora like us, we can go on and say, take some silly piece of news in India and say some celebrity is dead. I need to be able to go to my app and check it. And that app needs to be as engaging, because remember, India is made not mostly now of very young people. It's got a very young population. So you got to get an app that actually appeals to them. So I think that that's the way to go. And the media themselves have to be very careful in not pushing the partisan politics. And they can do that. I understand fear. They can do that by partnering with civic society, and in particular law associations.
Right. And you say that the media will have to take steps, and that media will have to take the action. We also talked about how media should get in touch with civic societies and legal associations to come together and bring about the action. But why isn't a media organization scrutinizing its own peers? Why isn't media using its power to bring other media associations or other media organizations and make them accountable?
And that's a great question, and I think that when there's obviously wrongdoing done by any association, I mean, if you're a medical doctor, there's the doctors, the medical board, they strike you off, and you're asking that question. So I think that, first of all, I think we come back to my other point. Your media association needs to be much stronger. Right? So just as what happened recently, I mean, it's a travesty of, I mean, at like huge levels to, basically they failed in their duty of power to report on the coronavirus and what was happening in India at a time when India needed it the most. And at first, India, it seemed, was doing quite well. And now it's just almost getting completely out of hand in a country facing so much poverty. Why was the media being so irresponsible? And they need to be held to account. I think there needs to be a self-governing media body made up of kind of very independent, highly respected, maybe a body. You could include judges, you could include journalists, you could include writers, intellectuals and thinkers who are very highly respected and squeaky clean to be part of that board. That's one way. The other thing that I would like to say to you is, in defense of my profession, is that the media is being scrutinized every single day, right? I mean, every time I write an article, even in Trinidad, a small country like Trinidad, I'm being hugely scrutinized. And people can, these days, they can take a screenshot of my column, they can put it on Facebook, they can put it on Twitter, they can circle what I've done wrong, and it goes viral, and it could actually mess. And that has happened to me once. Instead of, I left one word out, I made a terrible mistake, and, you know, literally, I mean, the hate came at me in a big way. So what did that teach me? First of all, it taught me, if you're in the media, have a thick skin, right? And the second thing that it taught me is, like, do what you've been trained to do. Have an eye to detail. Fact check every single thing. And these days, we have tools. I know that people say that we don't have time and that we're not. Media workers are paid very little, by the way. There's no formal training. I don't know if there is in India. I mean, it's voluntary. But a lot of people actually, at some, maybe 50 or 80 years ago, it was kind of okay. Because anybody with a literary bent of mind or curiosity was able to join. But if anybody can become a media worker without too much training, that's a problem. So I think the training needs to be stepped up for media workers. The hours of work need to be, and the terms and conditions of work need to be organized. But because media workers are frontline workers, right? When you have a media worker going out there to cover, you're saying, okay, that there's kind of a situation where there could be mass spreading of coronavirus. Guess who you're sending? You're sending your reporter there. So as frontline reporters, the Media Association and civic society must respect the profession, must give it as much support as possible. We must ensure they're trained, they're paid, they're given, and that same kind of support, what we are asking for outsiders must be done on the inside as well, right? The checks and balances. So I think that must happen. But on the other hand, I also think that media workers in this context, we really don't have much power. In fact, it's the business that has power. So I write something, that's going to cost somebody some big fat advertising. I might very easily be eased out. I'm not saying I will. I'm not talking about me. I'm just talking about a writer and a journalist. So the real people you should be questioning here are the business, big politics, who don't like what's being written, as we saw in the case of Modi, that kind of interference. And they are the people who try to influence how journalists work. They're the people who force self-censorship. And they're the people who often, and the people who employ us and under less than good conditions, but expect a very good output, they should be questioned as well. So the whole thing can't fall to media workers.
Right. So because it's the big businesses that we should question the most, do you think paying for journalism will solve this issue? Do you think that is the ultimate solution?
Well, I think that in terms of, it depends on what you want, right? There's always going to be a wide swathe of people who actually they're not going to subscribe to The Economist. They're not going to subscribe to the Financial Times, and they're sure as hell not going to. A lot of people are saying, well, we're not paying for it. So we have to understand that that is actually what's going to happen. But what we do have a market for, and that's happening a lot in the US, and it's happening even in Trinidad, it's happening, is the journalism that you subscribe for. And I think that actually that's a great way for journalism to go. But how that would work is that if you use a lot of specialized categories, so for instance, you take science journalism, you take medical journalism, you take journalism related to social ills, battered women, or you take the plight of the woman child, or raped women, or NGOs, and you do very specialized newsletters. I think that actually there, all the tenets of journalism that we were taught, objectivity, research, holding ourselves responsible alongside, having the power to write this and disseminate it. I think that actually there is a big space for that kind of journalism to happen, but in a very specialized kind of way. And actually, I think that would be very, very good for journalism to have that paid. So if I, for instance, I mean, my second career is in creative writing, and I want an article that Arundhati Roy wrote, or or Vikram Seth wrote, or I want to know what Dalrymple wrote about our history. I'd be quite happy to pay for it. And similarly, if there's somebody in medicine and they want to know in Trinidad now, what are the long-term effects of the coronavirus? And those studies are actually coming out. They'll subscribe. So I think that it's going to be very divided. It's going to be a vast section of the population will still go for the free media, for the sensational media, for the Daily Mail. And you can't stop it, because in a free market economy, the supply and demand, they are going to go for it. And, you really can't change that. But you can create lots of sub-journals, and even within your organization, create a kind of culture around the organization. So people say, I want to be associated with that because I think I depend on it. So it's what happened. Even if you look at the Trump election, it was really interesting. I mean, people who wanted to hear it. For instance, I went on to Fox just so that I want to know what the other side is thinking. Yeah. At the same time, I want to see what I think would be the most kind of, the objective news. So I'll go on to MSNBC. So people can then choose. It's a matter of choice, but you give them that choice. I think it would work very well, the paid journalism. And paid journalists as well. It would give them a living.
Right. And then what are some of the steps that people should take if they're not paying for journalism to make sure that they still get reliable content and they are still not being pulled into maybe propaganda or hate or something of that sort?
That's an excellent question. By the way, all these questions were excellent, and I could not believe you're not a journalist. I think there's two things. That actually goes back to the education system. Now, think of the average kid, right? I don't know if you've got a sister or a niece, and I'm sure she's about 2 or on the iPad. This is the new generation, right? Whereas, I mean, I was probably climbing some trees in Tobago or something. But the education system has to change, because the amount of information that young people are being given, and I mean, it's literally a tsunami of information. It starts with the education system, how you filter through it, how you manage the internet, how you go to sites that are educational versus as sensational. Now, me being in the media so long, I can very quickly pick up what's fake and not, but that's pure experience. But I think that, first of all, people really, really need to be educated as to what's credible and what's not. And I also think that, and this is, I really love my journalists and my journalism worldwide. And I do think that journalism, that newspapers, even those that say, okay, these are behind a wall, the respected newspapers will always provide content that is relevant to the world population or to very singular populations, that is going to be credible news. And I think that it's a matter of educating yourself to maybe go to the same fact-checking sites, find out which ones will give you the credible news and go to that. And the other thing that journalists also, I think as journalists, where we failed horribly and we continue to fail, is that, like, for me, like, you know, it's obvious to you, I'm sure, that I'm a liberal journalist, and I take my job very seriously, which is to ensure that the weak have a voice. But, you know, maybe somebody like me would not have interviewed somebody who's racist. I would not have interviewed somebody who'd come right out and say, well, you know, Black people are this, or Indians are dirty, or you know, Black people shouldn't be around here, or you know, the Latinos are this, all the stereotypes. I should have interviewed them. And as liberal media, we should be interviewing those people, because what's happened is that they've gone under the woodwork, right? And then they only crawl out during the time of elections. And that's when I think that they can create very, very dangerous dictators. I think we got away by this much recently in America. And why do we care? Because when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. So I think it's really, really, I think it's absolutely important for all of us to be hugely aware of all the things that are at play, and create more educated societies around social media. And you know, maybe journalists can also play a part in that with seminars, etc. Give back.
Right. I completely agree with one of your points where you said that journalists need to start interviewing people from the other end of the spectrum as well, because if they start feeling ignored, is when they feel left out and they feel that their bubble is being separated from ours, and that is when they rise up.
That's right.
I completely agree to that fact. And taking that into account, people who do try to maybe raise a voice for the people who are less represented are sometimes, because of this, because of the massive polarization that's available, that's ongoing, are sidelined by the government or people in power. Taking all of this into consideration, do you think that freedom of speech or freedom of press right now exists only on paper in India?
Well, I'm very sorry to say, and this breaks my heart, because, you know, I've always been very proud of the fact that India is the largest democracy in the world. You know, I am now a very proud Trinidadian citizen. Let me say that. I love my adopted country. But I also, you know, I'm split in many pieces, as I told you earlier, the Muslim, the Hindu, but I think the heart expands for all of it, right? And I've been very, very disappointed with the fact that all this interference that we spoke about a little bit earlier, I think under the Modi government, you know, it really, really did compromise the freedom of speech. And unfortunately, it compromised it to the level, I don't know what it is in India. Maybe it's because there's so many of Indians, right? Indians have a tradition which is good. In one level, we worship our teachers, we worship our elders, but now we're worshipping our politicians, right? So that whole, I think the younger generation is great, and I'm seeing lots of videos questioning the old order. We haven't questioned it, and what journalists have started to do in India, they've started to become sycophants. You know, an actor who I hugely admire, and I think my late brother used to look like him, Akshay Kumar. I was so surprised when he was there interviewing Modi. And I thought that what's happened is that it's become the journalism of sycophancy. It's become the journalism that we have been trying to get away from all our lives, which is in India. You know, when I'm there, I'm always appalled at the way help is treated, like they're invisible. right? We've fought against Indira Gandhi abolished the caste system, but it's really there. I mean, it's actually sickening. And also, I mean, to what level, say, take the photographers of India, right? Take all the paparazzi. Don't they see how sickening it is that you're running after, Taimur, who's a little boy of a celebrity, and meanwhile, millions of Indian children are suffering with malnutrition, with lack of clean water, with lack of food, with lack of, basic human rights. So yes, in a sense, I think freedom of press has gone, partly because of our own psyche, because we get so easily impressed. We get impressed by wealth, we get impressed by fair skin, we get impressed by lineage, we get impressed by power. And in that level, I think I think, is where a democracy starts to fail us. The whole panchayat system and all of that was something that worked. But, every single day in the media in India, I am completely appalled. If I watch some Indian movies from here, I swear to you, I would have thought that every Indian was pale skinned. Every Indian girl was very fair, almost like an Arab looking girl. And there were no dark Indian girls in India. There were no dark men in India. That all Indians went to Prague for their vacation. And, it really, sorry about this, it pisses me off, because there's so much beauty in India itself. There's so much beauty in our own culture. If we never left India and you just shot in India and you just used Indian writers for your shows and for your film scripts, I think that India would be absolutely amazing. But I hope that what is happening with the Black Lives Mattering, with the whole, the Me Too and the Black Lives, the wave that it's taken all over the world, it reaches India too. And that we, over here, in the West, there's a lot of questioning. One of the words everybody uses every day, even in my writing, while I'm writing, I'm being asked by my editor, is that your privilege speaking? You have to check in with your privilege, And I think that this whole kind of aping of the West is really disgusting to me. And don't Indians see how obscene it is to carry an Armani bag in their hands and go to the airport? That bag can feed a whole goddamn village, So I think a lot of it starts with defining, and I will say, because I still have Indian, an overseas citizenship, is that we have to define who we are as Indians and what we admire, right? Do we admire old text? Do we admire books and reading, which is and education and the elderly and being gracious to everybody, no matter what their caste, or are we now starting to only admire what's only available to 0.0000001% of society? And where does that leave the masses? It leaves most of India feeling terrible about themselves. So we have to start with ourselves, honestly, as Indians. And once Indians start to say, I don't want to see, celebrities so much. I want to see the ordinary story of an ordinary guy, maybe like Sushant, sure. But, he's gone, maybe he hasn't made it as big as him, boy from Bihar. Maybe he hasn't made it as big as Sushant, but he's made a great life for himself. He's used education, he's used technology, because, when I was in India, maybe 2 years ago, I remember I had to go to the wedding the following day in Bombay, and I gave a blouse to switch. That boy stitched the blouse, and he came to my hotel room at 3 a.m, and it didn't fit properly. He took it back and he fixed it at 4. That's how industrious, normal, a lot of young Indians are. And that's what I'd like to see promoted in India. And I think we really have to take those blinkers off and stop wanting to see, a kind of westernized version of India, which is actually not what we are. And actually, we're loved throughout the West for our philosophy and who we are at most authentic. I don't know if I answered your question, but I felt very strongly about all of this.
No, I think you did where you said that the freedom of press has been curbed to some limit, but it has been not only because of the government, but also because of our own self, where we started to ape the West so much that we lost track of our own philosophies, of our own idols, and started to ape something else, and somewhere lost ourselves. Right?
Yes, exactly. And I really don't I don't like the fact that, you know, every actor is now kind of an activist for the government. And, you know, as much as you like them, as beautiful as they are and as nice as they look on the air, I think that journalists need to take journalism back, because I know that it's been on record that the Modi government has threatened to pressure journalists who don't regard the Hindu patriot government's principles. And maybe this is their way of sidelining it and still making money and not hurting anybody. But I think that's the cowardly way. And I think that the Indians can do much, much better than that.
Right. Thank you so much. That was a really insightful answer. To close this, I have sort of a rapid fire round
Oh,
where
no.
where I ask you to answer in one line uh, three advices or requests, basically. The first
Sure.
is an advice to a social media news consumer.
Limit social media. That's limit social media. And I think that's my main advice, is that if you limit it and read some more, do more reading. There's thousands of books. India has a very flourishing publishing industry. Read more and limit social media is really what I would say. And when you do go on, try to really cull what you're seeing, so you go for excellence and you don't go down rabbit holes, because you're wasting so much of your life when you do that.
Right. Advice to an upcoming journalist.
Go back to the basics. Remember who you are. You are there. You may be a very young journalist, but remember that you are actually a very, very important pillar of democracy. You are the fourth estate. You are there on behalf of people who do not have a voice. Do your research so that you are almost above reproach. You see both sides and do your research in a very, very impeccable way. Do not try to push your agenda. Do not make it about you, and make it about the story.
Right. And finally, a request to your colleagues or peers, both in India and there with you at Trinidad.
Well, I do love my peers in Trinidad, I will admit. And I think that, you know, we're very, very high up on the, you know, in terms of how we've performed as journalists. But I think if I did have a little request to journalists in general, it would be that see both sides of the story, even the sides that are ugly, because we are forced to, it's our duty to report on everything. We have to see, we are the ones who are the mirror of our society, and we have to report both sides. Do your homework. And the one thing I will say to journalists, which I think we've all fallen down on, and maybe I have at times as well, it's not about you. It's not about how you look, and it's not about the whole selfie culture. It really is about the story. And ultimately, if you want to take it into a macro level, it's about the country that you actually work in and serve, and a great professional journalism.
Right. And that brings it to a close. Thank you so much for your insights. It was amazing to look at India and the news media industry in India from a international lens. And I believe I personally have gained a lot. I hope the people who go through this interview also see a lot of it and do actually lead to a news media industry where we can see both sides, where we are more objective and be the voice for the people who are actually voiceless. Thank you so much for your time, and it was really a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much. It's always wonderful to meet with a compatriot. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
A request to your fellow colleagues or peers?
Please don't give me so much work. Please do your own work. I don't want to take over your work also.
And an advice to a social media news consumer?
Check your facts.